I'm reading out of Eyes of Horus. It's the story of Ra-Up, son of a priestess of Ra and heir to the nomarch of the Oryx. Now, this is a book by Joan Marshall Grant, and she describes her previous incarnations, one of which is Ra-Up. When Ra-Up becomes an adult, he joins a conspiracy known as the Eyes of Horus, which is dedicated to breaking the rule of fear and lifting the shadows of lust, greed, and cruelty from Egypt. We are now at chapter entitled Royal Envoy, which is part 5 of this book. The last chapter of this part 5 is the 9th, and it's Royal Envoy. Ra is now grown up. That year was a centenary of the dedication of the temple of Ra at Thebes. The ceremony should have been attended by Pharaoh, as it had been for the last 300 years, and when it became known that his health was too feeble to allow him to leave the royal city, it was realized throughout Egypt that the rumors of his approaching death were well-founded. I was very glad when I heard that the royal envoy who would take Pharaoh's place in the ceremonies was to be the vizier, or vizier, Amenemhet, instead of either of the princes, for I thought this sign of the royal will might prove sufficient to sway the gnomes of the north into supporting the vizier against any claim of Menhets, and so spare the watchers the necessity of bloodshed. Amenemhet was to stay with us on his way south. As he was coming as the royal envoy, he would be received as though he wore the double crown, and for many days the Oryx was busy with preparations for his arrival. It was arranged that he should land from the state barge at Hotep Ra and travel by road to the great house where Father would receive him. The road along which he passed would be lined with our people wearing the bright tunics of festival and strewing flowers and green rushes before the procession. Pavilions were being put up in the gardens of our house to accommodate those for whom we had no room within the walls. A great banquet was to be served to the nobles of the 2 adjoining gnomes of the House of Hare and the Jackal, who would be our guests for the celebrations. Dancers would perform in the great courtyard, showing us the ritual dances of the glorification of Ra and of Ptah's progress from his descent into earth to his unification. Before he knew Mary, I think Father would have resented this interruption of his solitary existence, but now he seemed to enjoy making plans nearly as much as we did. Quite often I heard him laugh, and he used to appeal to me for support against a new demand of Mary's. Only a mock protest, for he found joy in giving way to her wishes. Need all the oxen have gilded horns, he asked her. Could not those at the far end of the procession? Amenemhet is very unlikely to notice them. He made sufficiently gay with a little paint. Be made sufficiently gay with a little paint. No, Father, you mustn't be mean. Ra-Up has had 100 bulls brought down from the house of the 2 winds, and their horns are capped with gold, not just gilded. Would you have the Oryx shamed by the riches of the north? Father turned to me and said in faint despair, You see what she does to me? She is your wife. Can't you stop her robbing our treasure rooms to decorate a festival? Isn't it lucky for you that I'm here? Said Mary contentedly. Otherwise, you might be embarrassed at having such a meager display. Oxen with painted horns indeed, as though you were only a minor noble who was trying to impress the assessor of tribute with his poverty. I had another good idea I forgot to tell you about. I gave rolls of blue or yellow linen to every village, so there shall be no one without a new tunic, and I thought it would be unfair if those who won't be able to watch the procession hadn't share in the rejoicing, so I arranged for them to be given either 3 pieces of honeycomb or a jar of beer. Where did you get the beer? I asked. Oh, that was quite easy. I sent a message to Sebek's uncle, saying it was your request that he should distribute it as his share. And the honeycomb? That is coming from Ronan's eldest sister, the old one who doesn't live at Hotabra. I noticed she had many beehives when we stayed there soon after we were married. After spending considerable thought on such an important subject, Mary decided to wear the green instead of the white dress she had first chosen. You and Father will be wearing white and yellow because of their being the oryx colors, and all the litter cushions will be yellow. So me wearing green will be a change. It will be embroidered, of course, with little oryx like I had on my wedding dress, but silver instead of gold, as I am going to wear it over a silver loincloth. She was looking at herself in a large copper mirror, which had been one of my first gifts to her. I'm glad that the festival wasn't any later in the year, or else your son might have begun to make me look a silly shape. He seems to have curled himself away so tidily that you wouldn't really know he was there, would you, Ra? Her waist was still so slender I could almost span it with my hands and flowed down to hips narrow as a boy's. Perhaps there was a slight curve to her belly, but that only increased her loveliness. It's difficult to believe you really are having a child, I said. Are you quite sure? Dear Rahab, how could I be mistaken about anything so important? It will be about the 5th full moon from now when he is going to be born. Moon children are often very magical. Well, my nurse used to tell me that if I slept with a moon shining on my face, Sekhmet will catch me. But the second nurse said she was a silly old woman, and that Nut would take me under her protection and perhaps give me into the keeping of her sister Hathor, so that I should have the water magic. After that, I slept with the moon on my face as often as possible, and even opened the shutters when it was cold, and I had been told not to. Did you ever take any notice of being told not to? Only when you tell me. Other people always seem to tell me not to do things that I knew needed to be done. I used to sleep in the moonlight too. Perhaps if we hadn't, we should never have dreamt about each other. Mary was so disturbed by this idea that she put down the coal stick with which she was lengthening her eyebrows and turned round to look at me. Rahab, how awful. If you hadn't dreamt of me, you mightn't even have noticed me. I mightn't have done. The sun mightn't rise tomorrow in the east, but neither are very likely. She kissed me, and then went on with the decoration of her face, while I lay back and watched her. It's surprising what a lot of lovely things there are in marriage which I didn't expect, I said reflectively. Didn't you expect marriage to be lovely? I knew that with you it would be better than the shining land, which shows what a good prophet I am. But there are so many extra things as well. For instance, how could I have known how your back looks when you are plucking your eyebrows, or the beautiful curve of your arms when you lean forward to comb your hair? Nor had I seen your face in all its various stages, so very beguiling as it is at this moment, with one eyelid green and the other still unpainted. Don't you love talking nonsense, just because we are so happy. She nodded. I do. When we were first together, we never seemed to have enough time for anything except making love and serious conversation. I thought I loved you more than what was possible for a human being, even before we were betrothed. But if I now met you, the man I then was, I should call him a dullard and a fool for not having the wit to see a tenth of your quality. I wonder why other married people aren't happy like we are. Do you realize that of all the women I talked to about their husbands in the royal city, only 2 of them were really in love? A few thought they were, but it wasn't love as we know it. They seemed to be drawn together by a force outside themselves, like water weeds which become entangled with each other by the flow of the stream. Ptah doesn't make different kinds of animals obey a law which their nature does not allow them to follow in happiness. So why were people ever so stupid as to expect only one kind of marriage to be suitable for all kinds of humans? What would have happened if one of us had not been born in the same century as the other? Then we should not have found one another, anyone with whom we could have taken the oath of the new nome. Would you have married if you had never met me? I think I should, for the real part of me, the part that isn't just Mary, but all the people I have ever been and will be in the future. I would have known that Mary's waking must be spent without you. I should have learned to adapt myself to those conditions, like a cat I once had who lost a paw when she was a small kitten and learned to run on 3 legs. I should have gone on being with you away from Earth, of course, but down here I should have known it was no use expecting our degree of perfection in a husband, or else gone on looking for you in the man I married, and so always been disappointed. It would be terrible, Mary, to be married to you and yet to know that death would set you free to go to the person to whom you really belonged. It only seemed like that to you because we have a standard by which to measure lesser relationships. If we hadn't grown old enough in spirit to be capable of the greater affinity, we should be quite content with one which was not so permanent. Both of us must have many gold links with other people, and those links are not false, but because there is another which is stronger. Many marriages, where 2 friends take comfort in each other's company, are very happy, even though they remain 2 people in soul and spirit in spite of having borne children together. Why aren't more people capable of our kind of marriage? I think it is because they have shut themselves away from unity with the gods and so cannot hope to find unity with each other. When 2 lotuses have flowered, they can become fertile, for they have achieved the winged element. If those same lotuses had refused to thrust up their buds towards this light, and been content only to send more and more roots into the mud at the bottom of the river, they would continue to remain separate and uncreative until their mastery of water had given them strength to see the sun. The evening before the vizier's arrival, Mary and I went to Hotep Ra, where those of the retinue who were not accompanying Amenemhet to the house of the nomarch would be entertained for 2 days, until the time came for them to continue their river journey to the point where he would re-embark. As the colors of the watches were the same as the oryx, all of us could wear their symbol, white and yellow ribbons, on the right arm above the elbow, without arousing suspicion among those who did not belong to us. Pavilions had also been set up under shade trees and fields adjoining the gardens of Rodan's house, for here also there was a great assembly, both from the oryx and the 2 neighboring gnomes. The state barge was due to arrive in the early afternoon. At dawn, the streets of Fortebràs were thronged with people, and the houses were being decorated with green bows and garlands of flowers. Tall poles painted in bands of white and yellow flung long pennants every 20 paces of the road, which the procession would take some 5 hours to traverse, from Fortebràs to the house of the nomarch. Runners had been posted downriver to give news of the progress, and at high noon Mary and I took our place beside Royden and Hanouk on the landing stage. Both banks of the river were thronged with people, and among them went water carriers and men with jars of wine or beer on their shoulders. The air rippled with laughter and snatches of excited conversation. A double row of decorated boats made an avenue to the quay. Their sails had been taken down, the mast twinned with flowering vines, and the sides hung with brilliantly coloured cloths, so that in the distance they looked like small islands on which trees were growing. The lookout at the bend of the river signalled that the procession was coming into sight. To the beat of 100 oars, the gilded barge of Pharaoh came into majestic view. Uniform as the wings of wheeling swallows, the double banks of oars shone golden as they caught the sun. Now we could see the great plumes of scarlet ostrich feathers as the 8 fan-bearers stirred the air in rhythm with the rowers. At last the man who wore the white crown, the crown he would soon wear as Pharaoh instead of only as the royal envoy, could be clearly seen. He might have been a statue, so still was he on the great throne of cedar wood. In his hands were the crook and flail of Egypt. Round his neck the great pectoral of the high priest of Ra at noonday, a traditional title of the Lord of the Two Lands. Barge after barge came round the bend of the river, 50 in all, and the smallest of them of 40 oars. The gilding on the state barge was so heavy it seemed made of solid gold, and in the brilliant sunlight it was almost too dazzling to look upon. As one, the rowers lifted their oars from the water, and so perfectly timed had been the steersman's order that she came alongside the quay smoothly as a swan. The 8 giant Nubians who were the royal litter-bearers lifted the throne in which Amenemhat still sat, immobile, and set it down on the dais which had been prepared for it in the centre of the quay. Right. I finish this here, and I mark my spot, and I continue another time. Happy Wednesday.